saying that there is a gap, or maybe the gap is not as big as we think it is, and it's just being kind of manipulated?
Yeah, so I think there is a gap.
Okay.
However, there are those out there who are just not, feeding into that rhetoric and, see and have hope that there's still Black love out there. But as I said, now we're in a digital era. That gap is being more highlighted.
Okay.
Because a lot of people are feeding into that machine because of their personal previous experiences with relationships which didn't go too well. So we're using this platform as a venting tool, without getting the support needed to heal, in order to just do the self-reflective work or whatever is necessary, so they can jump back on that saddle.
Okay. I got it.
Brother Rick, same question. What do you foresee or see as you are, moving about and having your ear to the ground and, paying attention to the social media atmosphere? What is your overall perspective as where we stand in our relationships today?
Well, I think you may know, I'm not sure if everyone else knows, but my approach to the enigmatic issues of my people is primarily focused on the psychological impact and the psychological influences. So to answer this question, I'll go all the way back to 70 years ago. Frantz Fanon told us the force and the power of colonialism. More recently, Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, Dr. Naeem Akbar, Dr. Amos Wilson, Dr. Joy DeGruy, Dr. Howard Stevenson, all have talked about the influences from a psychological perspective. Is there a gap? Yes. Is it as huge as the media and the forces that make it out to be? No, because there's this idea that Black men prefer white women when 88% of married Black men marry Black women.
That's right.
So I think that we have to be careful of the narrative that's being written in mainstream media and social media, because again, like my brother said, we tend to play off of our emotions and our personal experiences. And just here in America alone, we're talking about 45 to 48 million people. And we can't assume that everyone's experiences are identical to our own. And we have to be willing to go out and look and see the truth of what's happening. There's a lot of Black love out there, but that's not going to get the press. That's not going to get the airtime. That's not going to be put out in front. What's going to be put out in front is the dysfunctionality. Again, as my brother stated, that's going to be highlighted because why? They know the force of the media. They know what propaganda does. If I present this image consistently enough, it becomes truth. And so what you get is a constant play. And every time there's a chance, it's highlighted. Let a Black man say anything positive about a white woman and negative about a Black woman, and it becomes the Black man's ideal. And it's not true. It's that person's way of thinking. And then we're not even looking into the psychological makeup of what made him. We're not dealing with the fact that we have our own internal issues of colorism.
Yes.
That drive a lot of that. And so it's easy to be upset. And I'll end my answer by saying one of the things that I do, I created and designed Black Men Lead, which is a rite of passage initiative for young Black males. And the first thing that we teach is the respect of the Black woman at all ages. No harm can be brought to that. Your number one responsibility is to protect. My call to Black men is to love Black women back to life. We've got to understand how our Black women got to where they are. And we have to, as we love to be called kings. We love to say that we're the head of the home, but we don't always understand the gravity of that role and what that means, and the fact that we are responsible for covering our women, not because of how we feel, but because that's what we're supposed to do. So it doesn't matter if I'm happy with you today. I tell my wife all the time, it doesn't matter if I like you today or not, I love you. And so how I treat you will never change, whether I'm mad at you, whether we're in one of our not on the same page moments. You will never know the difference. I walk you to your car every morning, kiss you and put you in your car. I hold you every night, not because we're on the same page all the time, but because that's what I'm never going to let you feel distance between us, because you've had enough of that. And so the responsibility of the Black man to end this particular answer is to be able to get outside of ourselves, because we've been beat up, we've been battered. There's so much that we could talk about that's not right for us, that it's easy to sit up and look for the closest thing to us to blame. And we have to be careful for that, careful about that. So my thing is, in agreement with him, we can decide what side of the coin we're going to be on. And I choose unity and love, and not to ignore the gaps that are there. And I can't ignore, because I literally counsel Black women, I can't ignore that the second leading cause of death for Black women between the age of 15 and 44 is intimate partner homicide, predominantly by Black men. I can't ignore that. I see it all the time. I deal with it. But that can't be our truth. We need to deal with that. We need to have I've said this for a long time, we need to have a code of conduct in the Black community that immediately deals with that type of behavior. When an elderly person, a woman, or a child is harmed, that needs to be dealt with. And we don't need to wait on the system. We don't need to wait. We need to be able to protect our women. That's another part of the distance and the gap. Our women don't trust us.
So so after listening to both of you guys, as I'm sitting here, I'm like, those of us that know that there's a lot of propaganda, there's almost, in a sense, an agenda, right? We understand that. But there's a lot of us that don't understand that. There's some of us who are dealing with situations in which you just mentioned, domestic violence, okay? Some of us know people who were hurt by Black men or a Black man. So even though those of us that know, we can kind of sift through it, but then there are those who are just going based off of their experiences with those within closest proximity to them, right? My question is, as far as the gap, because I am one who I really believe the gap is exaggerated, but I do believe there is somewhat of a gap there. And I do understand the macro of it, white terrorism, white supremacy. I do understand that. But I'm of the mind where I could understand that and also be realistic about the micro, which is personal responsibility on us, right? What I do understand is knowledge. For example, you could have the knowledge, and I'm more concerned about the people who don't have the knowledge, okay? Because these are the people who they're using as examples to say, you see, this is how these people are, right? And these people don't have enough knowledge of self to be able to say, no, this is my experience. This is not Black men. How do we begin to engage that part of the population, that part of the community, in discussing what they consider to be a straight up gender war between Black men and Black women? How do we begin to approach that?
Well, one thing I would say is change the narrative, and that's what you're doing right now, Sister Hanifah. You and Sister Alqamar have platforms like this, with, whether it's, yourself with who shares that knowledge, or, bringing brothers like us on the show, to share, our knowledge and experience and our perspective on what that means, and if we continue to, create platforms like this, and, just continue to push it out there and so forth, people would then see that, things are not what it seems to be, and one thing we need to overstand is like the whole like algorithms, how these white supremacists use the whole online domain when it comes to algorithms. See, like, for example, even when you're going on your phone and you might purchase something, then the next minute you'll see that what you've purchased, appears on, your homepage and so forth. So what they do is they push those algorithms in order, and even what you're clicking on, just to see the dysfunctionality. So they know if you've been interacting with that dysfunctionality, it just, that deception just starts to become your reality.
Mm-hmm.
So this is something we need to be aware of, because if we don't like understand how the machine functions, then we're just only going to get that one-sided part of the coin.
Good point. Yep.
Yeah. Brother Rick, you want to dive into that same question?
Sure. I agree exactly what I said, what my brother said. Here's my take on it. You mentioned personal responsibility as a part of the micro response or the micro engagement of it all. And that's always going to be my ultimate point when we're talking about white supremacy, racism, when we're talking about propaganda, when we're talking about all of the different things that we face as a collective, both here and abroad. It's always going to be, yes, that's it, but we are a unique and powerful people. We have the ability and the capacity to overcome it, but we have to know who we are. How they attack us is through identity crisis. If I can convince you that you're not who you really are, you will behave as that what you believe yourself to be. That's been proven over and over again. One of the mechanisms I use when working with my clients is called Psycho-Cybernetics. What it is, it means that once you believe that you're a certain thing, you'll change your behavior through your will if you want something different. But if you don't change the setting of the thermostat in your mind that says, this is who I am, you will automatically hit the automatic. It's like a thermostat. That's a cybernetic mechanism. You set the thermostat at 75. If it gets too hot, the AC comes on. If it gets too cold, the heat comes on. It's going to consistently set at 75 until you change the temperature. If you never change the temperature, you can open the doors, turn the fans on. It's going to keep adjusting to keep it at 75. The same thing with us. Until we change the temperature of our identity to reveal and represent the power we possess, we will continue to behave and act powerless.
Yeah.
We will continue to ask those who don't really truly have power over us to execute power and tell us what to do, how to do, and do for us. And so that's the gameplay. They consistently feed us the narrative via media of who we are. And as long as they can keep us confused, there's a reason why they went all out and beyond to get Dave Chappelle to wear that dress that he refused to wear. And they lost their mind, and him and Hollywood fell out, and he literally left the country for years. Because there's a force behind that. There's a purpose behind that. There's absolutely nothing that they do that does not have purpose. And it's people like ourselves that have to sit up and say, okay, it's not just good enough for me to know it. It's not just good enough for me to share it on my platform. I have to literally claim my voice and become so outspoken and forceful that I'm heard. I have to be so radical in my speech. And if you look at the voices, the Naeem Akbars, the Francis Cress Welsings, the Neely Fuller Juniors, radical. Their thoughts and the way they presented themselves didn't give credence to the suggestions of white supremacy. I'm not trying to please the system. I'm not trying to adapt and operate within the system. I have a uniqueness. My approach is always Afrocentric, and it's in that our power lies. We're that unique.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, Alqamar. I'm glad you said that, because there's two things. I've kind of been on this own self journey just about redefining. And one of the things that I'm realizing is that even when you think that you're people have these labels of conscious, you're a conscious man, you're a conscious woman, or you find even as you begin to do self work, you are going to buck up against white supremacy within yourself, right?
Absolutely.
And so even like how they have defined, like this morning, I was processing how much of our power we have lost by embracing feminism as Black women, right? I was just processing that, and so we've given up so much of our power just so that we could be validated and be within close proximity. In other words, people say that movie where say Malcolm X, I think, did a speech, and he was saying when the master was sick, the slave would say, "Oh, we sick,
boss, we sick."
Right. And so I thought of the feminist movement in that sense, where it's like somehow we got tricked into believing their struggle was ours, right, as women, and we actually sacrificed or gave up a lot of our power as Black women. And so as I was processing, I'm like, even manhood, since we're talking about this, in how they try to define manhood, and how much so many of us as women jump on that and project that onto our men. And I say that to get into the question of, there has been this ongoing conversation, we've talked about it on our show before, around protection. Okay, Black women not feeling protected by Black men. That is an ongoing conversation. It is a serious conversation as well. We've seen some videos where if someone wanted to, they could take that video and run with it and say, "See, I told you, Black men don't protect Black women." What do you guys have to say to that narrative that's being pushed, to where some Black women are saying, "I don't feel protected by Black men"? And let me just say this. I have learned that when women say that, they are not saying, they're not speaking because they know all Black men. What I'm often getting out of that is, when you go back into their childhood, they've never, because of the men who may have violated them. I know from my own experience, it might not even be directly, it could be indirectly, where you just seen abuse in your family and the men did nothing or whatever. So now you're talking about women, now they're adults and they've reached this point, and there is this machine, right, feeding that part of their self. They're pretty much exploiting or pulling on their own trauma, right? And some women just can't really sift through that and say, "You know what, I need some healing." What do you guys say to the narrative that is being pushed around Black men are not protective of Black women? Outside of the machine pushing it, is that a thing that you see, or is it just something that Black women they're making up?
You know what? I like the way you speak. I should have got you for as one of my panelists for my event next week, Saturday, because we're gonna be these topics are gonna be spoken about, on my event. How can our brothers protect our sisters' well-being? Because there's so many different angles we could come at. So both our brothers and sisters can learn from each other. One thing I would say, you highlighted yourself. This goes back to childhood, with and their timeline in general, with the brothers who have been inconsistent. Whether that's been inconsistent as fathers, inconsistent as when I mean inconsistent as their fathers, or fathers to their children, like failed marriages and so forth. And what doesn't help is when we switch on the TV
Mm.
and we're watching all of these type of reality shows, which keeps on throwing out those projections, you know, because that's how it programs our subconscious mind. So when that programs our subconscious mind, that's the we're gonna start to believe that's, you know, we're gonna run with that narrative, you know. So a lot of sisters were running with that narrative, and you know, then you know, they will probably, you know, share their experiences with their girlfriends and so forth who've had similar experiences. Then in that own bubble, they're gonna see life from the perspective as there's no good brothers out there, you know, because that's their own reality.
Mm-hmm.
You understand where I'm coming from? So at the end of the day, we, you know, as the brother mentioned earlier, it's about, you know, taking that power, you know, taking back that power, you know, just standing firm, and also, you know, just being in tune, like healing. You know, it's something which a lot of folks run away from and feel that they, you know, whenever someone suggests it, it's like, you know, you're going to be sent to the electric chair or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I know it's not a process which is easy, but we have to, you know, embrace it. We have to embrace it and do that work in order for us to, you know, make those changes.
Mm-hmm. Brother Rick, I have, you know, when we get into these type of discussions, I'm always cautious on not speaking above the audience, because we have people from all different perspectives of thought that join these discussions. And so I want us to, well, you to break down for us, for those who may not understand, why do I have to heal from what must I understand about oppression? What does the, you know, anybody oppressing me have to do with my relationship going spoiling? I mean, can you connect? Why do I have to stay on a code of conduct? What code of conduct? So can you kind of break down for us in layman's terms, what are we talking about here? Why, you know, why is it so important for those who may not understand and may not see the wizard behind the curtain pulling all the levers, and who that is, what that is, why they're doing it? I mean, can you in a few minutes break down for us, or for those who may not understand, how that relates to our relationships being divided or divisive, I should say?
That it boils down to trauma. And when I think about trauma, I think about Dr. Joy DeGruy, I think about Dr. Naeem Arbar, I think about Dr. Howard Stevenson, all whose shoulder I've stood on in my research. And it comes down to this. It comes down to trauma, and it comes down to healing. And then people say, okay, what's all that about and why is it? Because we hear a lot about it. We see all the memes. But what happens with trauma is it literally puts an imprint, not just mentally, but literally physiologically into you. You're triggered by things that remind you of past traumas, and you respond mentally, emotionally, psychologically, and physically based off of that. So say, for instance, you were traumatized as a child. And here's 20 years ago, I called a colleague because I was noticing this crazy phenomenon when I was treating Black women. And I said, hey, look, is it me? Or is it just every Black woman who's ever been molested as a child is choosing me to come to for help? Or do we have a problem that we're not addressing? He said, no, I got the same thing. And so we started looking for data that represented what we were experiencing, and it hadn't been done yet. But we started to learn that when we started asking and taking surveys and doing short studies, that we found out that as high as 60 to 65% of Black women have been violated as a child. That goes your trauma. Well, here's the problem with trauma. One of the primary components are cast off or side effects of trauma is the lack of trust. You stop trusting. You don't trust people. You don't trust your environment. And when you don't trust, you can't take action. So you're frozen. So what happens is this thing we call the familiar past. Your mind starts to, your brain and your mind can function in primarily two different ways: as a record of your past or a map of your future. When you're dealing with trauma, it becomes a record of your past. The problem with your brain being a complete record of your past or an archive, and you're operating off of that, is it gives you this predictable future. You're going to pretty much get what you've always gotten because you're literally living off of past experiences, and you're never using your mind at the imaginary function or the imagination to create a reality that you haven't experienced yet, which is how you change. You have to see something different in order to have something different. The problem is with trauma, it doesn't. So we get constantly reminded of our trauma in little subliminal ways that trigger us. And that comes the dissension between us, because most of us have experienced our trauma from someone of the opposite sex. Most men who've been traumatized by their mom. Most women who were traumatized by their dad, their uncle, or their older brothers or cousins. So early on, the very people who should have protected you violated you. Now, who can I trust?
Wow. So, Brother Rick, I have a question about that. I just had this experience yesterday. I had I work in child welfare.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a situation where one of the kids were able to articulate why they disrespect the woman around them. Little boy, and I was really impressed with it. I was like, okay, but we need to hear that. As young as he is, he's actually telling you. And I think one of the things that we don't put into perspective as Black women, we get so caught up in our own traumas as Black women that we don't put into perspective the traumas of Black men. Okay. There is a population of our Black men who have been violated by women. Okay, like by women, even though they don't see it as rape. Okay, it still has an effect on how they relate to Black women. Then also, I always talk to women who talk about men who disrespect women and say, I get that, and I know it makes us uncomfortable, and we want to rip his head off for the most part. You know what I'm saying? You calling my sisters bitches and whatever else. And I always go back to, but you do not know what the Black woman in his life represented for him, right? And what I mean by that is I'm talking about some of the most demeaning things that was said to that brother have been from Black women, his aunties, his grandmother, his mother. And then here we are trying to do relationship, right, with these men. And we're coming in there and we're saying we want the brothers to understand that we have a traumatic past, but we don't put into perspective that they may have, you know, a traumatic past as well. I think what's happening is that there are more spaces for women to deal with these issues. We have the sister circles and everything else going on, you know, retreats and all sorts of things. There's so many resources for us. And I want to see more resources for our brothers, because I think it's so necessary and it is so needed. Because if we're trying to do this thing together, we're talking about bridging the gap, then we need to be in support of that. We can't just be focused on the woman stuff. I want to see that for our brothers. I cannot facilitate that. I am a woman. I actually think that we need men like you guys to facilitate those type of things. I don't take a retreat, call it a guy's trip, whatever y'all want to call it. Go sip on some coconuts and kind of like sift through, you know, sort through some things. But how much of how, let's say they're talking about like the lack of support, protection, and any of you guys can answer this. How much of that do you guys think is rooted in traumatic experiences with our brothers have went through?
You want to take this, or you want me to jump on it?
Either way. Either way.
I'm going to defer to you. You go ahead.
I think it's a loaded question.
It's definitely.
well, you know, I agree. First and foremost, I agree. You know, for me, I've got, you know, I am founding member of a project called the Man in the Mirror Project, and the idea just, you know, springboarded from a documentary called The Man in the Mirror, and what influenced me to produce it was my own personal experience, you know, growing up, being traumatized, whether that's from sexual abuse, being placed in foster care, institutionalized racism, the list goes on. And when when I put this documentary out there, I didn't have no vision of it going further than, you know, the community space geographically where I was in, but then it kind of reached to different parts of the United Kingdom and overseas, you know. And one thing I would say is, you know, I was kind of influenced to do like more kind of talks, like lectures and so forth. But I guess from my walks of life, you know, connect with people overseas and just in different parts of the diaspora, it's influenced me to, you know, recently kind of, you know, put ideas together and also start Zoom sessions, you know, for brothers who are vulnerable, because, you know, now everything's kind of changed. You know, I'm more used to doing like face-to-face work and so forth, you know, just face to face, whether it's workshops or whatever I'm doing. And now I'm trying to get used to all of this online stuff. So, you know, I really appreciate what you're doing, brother, because obviously you've also have your, you know, rites of passage program, which you've mentioned, which I'm sure has been very effective and so forth. But if we're going back historically, you know, we could go back, you know, as far as, you know, when there was, you know, if term, is it buck breaking? If yes, that's it, the term buck breaking on the plantation, and, you know, those the brothers being traumatized from that. And when we have the whole intergenerational trauma thing, which plays out, this is just something which is just, it's, I don't know even where. If you want to take it away, brother, if you want to add to it, because
there's so much
heavy.
to unpack.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
much to unpack that it can't possibly be done in one segment. Even if we were taking a 2-hour segment, just in dealing with trauma, I think that something was mentioned in the intro to this particular question, and it was that women have all of these outlets, women have all these programs, women have all these spaces, and men don't. One of the things that we're trying to do at the Odyssey Project is create spaces that give men permission to talk about the trauma. See, the thing is, there's this idea that talking about being hurt is somehow unmanly, that it lacks masculinity. And so Black men have been conditioned and trained to bottle up the hurt and pain. And the problem is, anything that's bottled up and building up will eventually explode. And that's what we're not talking about. We're not talking about, we get the media to put it on Front Street when a brother breaks. Nobody wants to talk about how he got there. Nobody is born on a collision course with murder.
Good teaching.
That is a situation that took place that wasn't dealt with. And then there was another maligned and misapplied situation, whatever it is, that took place after that. You go back, you talk about the buck breaking. There was so much that went on to steal the manhood of the Black man. because they understood that once the ability of the black man was taken away to protect the black woman, so would his manhood and manliness go away, because we are built to defend and protect. That's why when you couldn't break one, you sold him off.
Yeah, and he plays in modern day society.
Because he would literally die to protect that woman and that child. And you couldn't have that happen on your plantation. So you sold him off, and then eventually he would become broken because he could never connect. And that also leads to this issue we have with black men not being able to stay. It's been, you know, you go through 400 years, well, 246 years of slavery, 246, 249 years of actual slavery. But then you got a situation that comes out of that. We act like when people talk about, well, slavery ended in 1865, that was 150. You act like when we walked off the plantation, we walked into mansions.
Yeah.
And we actually got the 40 acres and a mule. When the truth of it is, you put in black codes. You came up with 12 years of Reconstruction, where you pretty much brought the South back to what it was before the Civil War, and we didn't have any rights. You sit up and did convict leasing, to where literally being a vagrant became a felony, and you put us in jail for being homeless, and then you gave us back to the plantation masters that we actually were free from for pennies on the dollar, of which we got none of the pennies. Okay, and we can go on and on with redlining and benign neglect and mass incarceration. We can just talk about the whole racial caste system all the way up until now. It hasn't stopped. And tell me, at what point did we get this treatment for our trauma? You send a soldier over to Iran. You send a soldier over to Afghanistan. You send them anywhere where there's actual conflict, where lives are being lost. And they're over there for 6 months. When they come back, they've got to be treated for years for post-traumatic stress disorder. That was 6 months. We've been dealing with it and passing it down, not just through learning theory and social engagement, but genetically, epigenetically, we're passing it down. And you tell me, if we don't deal with it, we're going to have these situations. You take someone who was meant to express his power and you suppress it over and over and over and over again. That's where your adolescent, the vast majority of your adolescent violence comes from.
You know, Brother Rick, I have a quick question to just to clear up. You were saying, and then we wonder why black men don't stay. Are you talking about stay like in relationships?
Right.
Okay, I wasn't clear on that. And then the other thing is, I just saw someone that just mentioned in the comment section, victim mentality, stop making excuses, bug breaking, it's 2020. Now, one of the things that I do, this is why the Joy DeGroy, the Amos Wilson, this is why the psychological part of this needs to really come to the forefront, because I don't think we understand how that works.
Right.
You can have, I can be traumatized, and that trauma can touch my great granddaughter if it's not dealt with at any point in any generation.
Right.
A part of it that happens to us, and I'm gonna let you guys speak to that comment. I'm just saying a part of it that happens to, part of what happens to us is the dysfunctionality that trauma has created. We have normalized it.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. And we have even begun to call it culture. For us to function in this, to stay sane in this society, we almost have to be insane. Okay? Yeah. That's almost how it is. So when I saw that camera, I'm sorry, I was a little triggered by that, because I'm just like the psychological aspect of it and the effects on a cellular level. Yeah. On a cellular level, on a molecular level, we do not understand that. It was so long ago. So to talk about it now as to why we're having the issues we're having, some people look at it as we are just trying to make excuses. There are some of us who we don't even know that this thing is, like you just said, is affecting us today. We don't know.
Clearly, and hence why our relationships are in the current condition they're in. You know, we can say that, but then we don't understand why things are such in such disarray. And you cannot get back on course and on track until you get the root causes and the historical relevancy of why we find ourselves in this current day condition. So for somebody to say that, which a lot of people would agree with who did that, when I'm glad they said that, because now it gives us an opportunity to address it. But when they say things like that, it's clear for me that they don't get the root. They don't understand it on a deeper level. But any others you guys want to share?
Right. Yeah. I'm going to go right back, and I'm going to connect it. On the, like I said, I've been blessed to stand on the shoulders of some of the most unbelievable psychologists. Like I said, one of my favorites of all time is Dr. Amos Wilson, but also Dr. Naomi Arbara, Dr. Frances Cress Welsing. Dr. Welsing, God bless her soul, is actually the reason I went into psychology. Wow. 1985, she's on the Donahue Show on the heels of this push by mainstream media and the system to push Black intellectual inferiority, which was the late 70s, early 80s. It was this thing. They used IQ tests in which Black students were testing on an average of 15 points lower than white kids. And there's an element in it that deals with language, which is actually the white kid is going to be exposed to correct grammar just by culture more than the Black kid. And it was being counted against Black children. But we find out when we dealt with that later on down the line that it balanced out and we actually performed better. But Dr. Welsing was on Phil Donahue's show, and she was holding her own, defending the Crest theory of color confrontation. And that, I said, man, who is this woman? And so that started it. But all of these people that I've mentioned, Frantz Fanon, all the way back to the 1950s, Frantz Fanon on up, we've got to deal with this. They set the stage. My research was to take what Dr. DeGruy had did as far as post-traumatic slave syndrome, and to really look at the intergenerational transmission of trauma and how it takes place on multiple levels. And we want to talk about epigenetics, the genetic passing down of trauma through epigenetic tags and experiences. So it's literally passed on to the child. And it started with the study of twins, how the experiences of identical twins, as they got older, became more distinct, and you could easily tell them apart because they were living two different lives, and their lives were actually taking place. They share the exact same DNA, but the more distinct their life experiences were, the more distinct they became visually. One may have come up with cancer, one may be healthy. Why? Life experiences, your literal experiences will down-regulate genes, up-regulate genes, make you more susceptible to cancer, make you more susceptible to diabetes, all other diseases. It's there. But here's the thing. In studying that, I also studied the Jewish Holocaust. And this is where it got interesting. I found this study, epigenetic study on the Jewish Holocaust. And that was this part where the grandchildren of Holocaust survivors who were never a part of the Holocaust and purposely had not been told about certain things were having dreams about what their grandparents experienced. And so I said, okay, we got something here. So we're talking about something on a level you can't imagine. Here's the problem. I don't care if it was 200 years ago. If you didn't deal with it, traumatize people.
Pretty much.
Absolutely.
That's right.
Absolutely. And if there's no framework which is presented to deal with that, then, you know, in regards to the comments, sorry, I can't even see the comment section just because of how things are displayed and so forth. So if you don't have no framework, then how would it be an excuse?
But you got to go, you have to actually understand when someone says that's an excuse, that's actually been grilled into the head of the Black man, that he cannot have any excuses, that it's either you're going to do it or you coming up with an excuse. My thing is, I think we can have both. I think we can say why we're doing it and still hold one another accountable for doing better. It's not saying we can't do better because this happened. Look what the white man did. No, that's not what we're saying. What we're saying is if you don't know what was done, you can't fix it. You can't change it. You can't address it because you'll go along thinking you got a bunch of people that just think black men are just naturally inherently violent. And that's not the case. I've proven through the rites of passage that the second most prevalent influencer on African-American adolescent and young adult male violence is the lack of proper socialization. We aren't preparing these young men to face what they're going to go through as a black man.
Yeah.
And so
I fully agree with you. I fully agree with you, brother. I'm just, asking that question to the person what left that question in the comments, because you pretty much, broke things down in a nutshell,
So my question to you guys, I see a question in the comment section, and so this is Rhonda, and she's pretty much asking, what are some steps in starting the healing process between black men and women? So I want you guys to just speak on the men perspective, like from the angle of the black man. What are some things that you guys, from your observation, can say perhaps the brothers can do towards the healing process or bridging that gap between the woman and themselves?
First,
bridging it. Go
on. Go ahead.
Well, maybe I think one thing which would be good is, a lot of the times there are either sister circles or there's brother circles. I think there needs to be more brother and sister circles together, where that's I'm just putting it out there. So
I've been in some of those. I'm sorry, and I came out saying we might need to do this separate for a little while before we come.
Okay.
I'm just saying I've been in some of those, and it is
depending on who's delivering.
For each side to hate each other. It's sorry, go ahead, brother.
And it depends on as I said, what framework is being presented. Like for example, there is, so basically I'm just going to give this as an example. So if there was a man and woman which are both placed together, one thing which I've done in the past, and this is something which I'll be using when when we start our Zoom circle sessions, is writing down 5 things which you feel which would affect the other person. So writing 5 things each which you think which will affect the other person, and writing down 5 things which you like about the other person, and so forth. This is just something simplistic to start with, because it's kind of at least creating, it's just breaking that mold of, taking those, the brother and sister outside their comfort zone, but also getting them to identify their pros and cons. Mm-hmm. You understand where I'm coming from? And once both brothers and sisters can identify the pros and cons, then we're at least making some sort of progress, because a lot of the times we can't identify our own issues unless that mirror is being placed in front of us, or if we're being put in that position where we can do the actual work. So it's interesting because I've never been in those situations you've been in, Sister Hanifah. I've just heard about, sister circles and brother circles separately.
Yes.
But a lot of the times we can't.
Somebody has their volume up. If you turn your volume all the way down, that'd be helpful. Get some feedback. Brother Rick, there's Cassie on the stream brought up a good point. She says allowing women to explore their feminine energy requires vulnerability, but this system will not allow time for us to be vulnerable until we heal our individualized pain in order to build together. So my question is, how do we heal in the midst of a war zone? I mean, because that's a real thing. It's like every other day you know, it's almost like you know, we got to watch out for landmines. And so how are we healing and at the same time watching out for landmines?
Here is my take on this, and I've literally been studying this dilemma for probably at least 2.5 decades. So this question doesn't stump me at all. It's going to take work, but here's the thing. I'm going to use a physiological analogy to make my point. If you go off and you're running through a jungle and you're in a war zone, whatever, whether you are being chased by a tiger or a bear or you whatever, you know, you study putting your hands on rocks, you're climbing. What happens is you're going to start a different type of healing process than the average person. The average person cuts themselves. They don't do anything with that piece of their body until it heals. And it pretty much heals with a slight scarring, no real. But what happens is when you're consistently re-injuring before you heal, you start to callus. It makes you rough, hard, and harder to injure, but also harder to experience anything soft because you can't touch or feel. So you tend to be a little more rough and rush. So what we actually have to do is understand roles. We're so out of our element because it's been forced upon us. They used the division to create a situation that forced Black women to take on roles they weren't inherently designed to take on. And now there's this battle for certain spaces that we don't understand. So what actually has to happen is the Black man, and this is the part, this is where I get a lot of pushback, because Black men feel like when I tell them this, I'm not hearing their side. What I'm saying is, there comes a thing in any situation where there's conflict, somebody has to be the first to say, okay, you know what, this isn't working, I'm gonna do this. As the Black man who has declared himself king and wants to be referred to as king, wants to be referred to as the head. I tell people all the time, we've been commodified. As Black men, we've been commodified. If we can't provide, nobody looks at anything else we can do. Yep. So what happens is we forget that. I tell everybody, before I'm a provider, I think I do a pretty good job at that, but before I'm a provider, I'm a protector. That's my number one role. Nothing happens to my wife or my kids under my watch. Absolutely not. And one of the things that happened when my wife and I got married is there was this kind of conflict with our family because I became the go-through. And even with our older kids, you got to go through me. She's not going to experience all of that. So you go through me, and what that means is you can't come with that BS. So that means I'm checking it at the door. But what happens is when that happens with the Black man, I tell Black men all the time, you want to see the Black woman do some extraordinary stuff? Give her a space where she feels safe. And what'll happen is when she gets that safe, she'll heal. When she doesn't have to fight every day, when she doesn't have to wake up and go to war, when she ain't got to figure out how to pay the bills and stay and teach the kids and love the kids and change the kids, when you give her that space and says, baby, you're safe now, I got you, she'll heal. Here's the beauty of it. She'll turn around and pour back into you and heal you. Absolutely. Somebody has to be willing to say, I'm going to put a stop to this and stop pointing finger. But the problem is we've been trained to blame. So we're looking for the blame. I'm going to share this with you and I'll be done for the night. I was reared by my great-grandfather, who was the son of a sharecropper, born in 1909. Second grade education, one of the wisest men I ever knew. And he told me something. He always taught me a lot. But when I was 17 years old, he stopped me coming in. He said, sit down, I'm going to talk to you. He said, everything else I've taught you, I hope you got. But if you get this one thing, it's going to take you a long way. He said, you're in one of three places in life. He said, you're either going in a storm, or coming out of a storm. He said, son, the first thing you're going to want to do when you find yourself is in that storm is to find someone to point the finger at, to blame. Don't waste your time. 99% of the time it's you. He said, what your number one responsibility is to come out of that storm a better man than when you went in. Let the storm shape you. It can't destroy you. Let it shape you. And so my thing and my challenge to men is to start allowing the storm to shape you. Our women need us. It's not about who's wrong. I hold women to the same culpability that I hold men, but I understand and I say this all the time. We will only get as high as our women can spiritually elevate us, but we will only get as far as our men can physically lead us. We need to know our roles.
That was beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. Good stuff. Brother Ola, you wanna take us out with any parting words?
Well, as I said, this conversation doesn't stop here. You know, it's something which needs to be ongoing. And, you know, as people who are seen in the community as, you know, those who are influential, we need to make this much bigger. You know, we need to continue to make those connections and so forth. And as I said, I've got an virtual event next week, Saturday, with the theme, how can our brothers protect our sisters' well-being? So, you know, these conversations will continue, you know, not just with my event, but with, you know, whoever decides to, you know, take that stance. You know, Sister Rhonda does her, has done a couple of Zoom group sessions with her group, the Black Awakening Movement, which, you know, speaks about similar topics and so forth. So we need to continue to, you know, have these dialogues in order for us to, you know, just to get the message out there, so our brothers and sisters can see that there's more than one side, you know.
Yeah. Somebody in the comments, before we leave out, someone is asking if any of you guys have any male support groups.
We have a couple of local in the Houston area here in the U.S. And I am actually currently working on building a national network with an extension of Black Men Lead, because with Black Men Lead, we deal with ages 4 to 30. The rite of passage takes place at age of 13, but we also deal with everything that follows. So we're dealing with those brothers, but yeah, we are working on creating a national network. I think one of the ways that we are handled is that we are proximately isolated, even though we have all this technology. People we're at some levels, we're isolated to the neighborhood we live in. And we have access to one another on a global scale, but we don't access it and use it properly.
Absolutely. On my side, we've got an initiative called My Brother's Keeper International, which is quite new. And we've got our online program, which is launching the end of February, which will provide tutorials, workshops for brothers from 18 plus who are vulnerable and can help with their well-being, their self-development, and their healing and so forth. So I am, you know, currently bridging the gap with brothers and sisters from different parts of the diaspora, you know, to you know, make this happen, you know, because in order for us to be more effective, we have to, you know, expand, you know, just like, you know, brother just mentioned, we have to expand.
Yeah, Ashe. And I just want to say to the sisters out there, as it relates to our brothers, the advice that I would like to share is to just be more open to hearing our brothers, hearing them. You know, it's a lot of times that, you know, we get the point the finger scenario came up, and I see a lot of that, especially on social media. They pointing the finger. The brother can't even broach, you know, his opinion without, you know, if it has anything to do with the opposite sex. Women coming down hard. And I see it on both sides, but I'm just speaking to my sisters in particular. You know, sometimes it's best to just allow people to vent. You know, that's part of the healing process. You know, we may not like, it might not feel good to hear, and it may not come out, you know, in the proper context, and, you know, it might burn a little to hear it or read it. But I think, you know, if we do more asking each other questions, as opposed to Um,
Dr. Rick Wallace here.
cause pain.
Inviting you and welcome you.
You know, so you hurt, and it hurt you. So in return, you got to put them back. As opposed to asking the question, why do you feel that way? What makes you say that? And building and opening up an opportunity for dialogue, as opposed to
we do.
that, you know. So that would just be my only advice. If you if you just be more mindful of your responses to the brothers, because as I think Brother Rick mentioned, you know, traumatized people cause trauma to other people. So, you know, if somebody's hurting you, that trauma is coming from somewhere, and we got to understand it before we can move towards steps to fix what the problems are. So that's just my advice. And I thank you, brothers, so much for coming on.
No, we thank you.
Thank
no,
you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yes,
It was
sir.
definitely an honor.
For me, I would just say, being that this is part 2 and the last segment of this particular topic, we really need to provide safe spaces for our rehumanization process, because we're people that have really been dehumanized for a very, very long time, and no one else
brothers and sisters
rehumanize us. We have to rehumanize ourselves, and that means allowing each other to feel, right? Because with us, we often don't think our brothers have a right to their feelings, which is dehumanizing them. So it's just, we need to really create safe spaces in our relationships. And when I say relationships, I don't necessarily mean like love relationships. You have cousins, you have nephews, you have uncles, you have grandfathers, you know, wherever we can, just providing safe spaces where gentleness and patience and understanding is present, so that we could just begin the process of redefining and rehumanizing ourselves. We just really been dehumanized. And a lot of the ways that our sisters perceive our brothers is almost like animals, you know what I mean? And so we kind of have to really be careful about that, because we are going to be, if we're not, we find that even those of us who are conscious, we're contributing to our own demise. We're actually working with the enemy against ourselves. And we actually don't even realize it. So really just creating those safe spaces amongst ourselves, first starting with the nucleus, which is the family unit. You know, start having conversations with each other, and in spaces where there's no attack, where it's just understanding, you know, and allowing each other to talk, because that's a step towards just us rehumanizing ourselves.
Okay, family. And again, thank you so much. A special thanks to Ola for coming all the way from London, talking to, I know it's a 5-hour difference. So we thank you so much, brother, for sacrificing your time.
You're welcome.
And Rick, thank you again. Thank you so much. And I appreciate you both.
You're welcome.
Okay, family, we always ask if you heard anything in this discussion that hit home for you, or that you think other people can benefit from. Share the information. It does none of us any good for the information to just sit there in your box. You got it. If you got something from it, well, then share that, spread that love, and allow somebody else to be blessed as well with the information. Okay, family, join us on the Empower Hour Talk Show on Facebook, and we're here every Monday live 8 p.m. with a whole brand new different topic of discussion. Take care of each other. Peace.
Peace and love.
Peace and love. Out.